What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Midweek Move. For the next 2 weeks, it's going to be a little bit of a different type of episode. We sat down to record a conversation on Luke chapter 6, the first portion of it, and the conversation went a bit longer than we had expected. We did a really great deep dive into two particular aspects about this passage in Luke chapter 6. And we decided after some prayer, some thought, that it would be best to break this up into two separate episodes. We feel like it's a little bit more digestible. The way that the conversation broke up, it just seems like this will be a better podcast for you guys to take in, to digest, and to consume, and to not just listen to. I want to encourage you guys, don't just listen to these conversations, but really ponder them, apply them to your lives. Ask yourselves, how do these play out in my day-to-day personal life? And so today's conversation that we're going to be having is based around the idea of the Sabbath. Who is the Sabbath for? Why was the Sabbath given? How do we live the Sabbath out in a real way? So let's jump into that conversation today. Hello and welcome to the Midweek Move, podcast extension of the Healing Place. The podcast where we examine the scriptures line by line, verse by verse, and ask ourselves, what is happening here? Today, ladies and gentlemen, join us back here at the bright light of Jesus. That's not what we're going to call that, but what is? I don't know where we're going anymore. Back at the microphone is our lead pastor here at the Healing Place, Pastor Scott. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing very, very well.
You've been on?
Yeah, I've been on a little hiatus.
Taking care of different things. You've been took a trip up north to a big conference called Legacy, which is a bunch of ministers helping them to grow and connect. And what is it? Live a legacy.
Launch. Live. Leave. So those who are just now beginning, those who are in the middle of it, like me, and then those who are finishing.
Yeah.
We want to help people start well, live well, finish well.
Yeah.
And so it was really awesome. One of our guys, one of our elders, Carlos Renfro, he got his minister's license, and that was really cool to watch that and be a part of that. So that was a really neat experience. And it was good. And then I had some, then I got hammered and I was down for a little bit.
No, when he says hammered, he means he got sick.
Yeah. Sorry. That's old language. Yeah. We're not that kind of church, y'all.
Oh, man.
But I did get hammered by a sickness,
right?
And still feeling the after effects a little bit. So we're just going to pray my voice is good to go, and we can roll through this. Excited. Yeah,
well, it's been some interesting conversations the last couple weeks. We had Celeste on a couple weeks ago. We had Justice from Bridges College on with us, who happened to be in town for a lead conference, which is the conference you and I were at a couple weeks ago. And so we've had some really great things. And but I bring up Legacy for a reason. That is because one of the things that you guys work about with Legacy, and what I appreciate, is you guys aren't so much concerned about these guys being in ministry, but being healthy individuals, finding rest, finding Sabbath.
Yep.
And today we're diving into a really interesting conversation about what the Sabbath is. That Jesus, because Jesus kind of challenges the leadership's mind on what the Sabbath was.
Yep.
And it's important for you guys to keep in mind that the Sabbath it's something God did give us. It is a commandment of the Lord to take a break, to take a rest. But the Pharisees at the time, they ran with it, and they have a plethora of rules for the Shabbat, for the Sabbath.
They do, but at the same time, Jesus was really good at seeing the inaccuracies and the hypocrisy. Of their stringency in the law.
Right.
Yet when it came to them personally, there were some holes in their, I'm not going to call it theology, but in their way of thinking. There were many holes in that.
In their policy of life, if you will.
That's right. And also their mindset of what others should be doing as opposed to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus was always quick to point that out.
Absolutely. Well, let's jump into it. Starting Luke chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Pastor, if you are able to, if you could read that for us.
Okay, now it happened on the second Sabbath after the first that he went through the grain fields, and his disciples plucked the heads of grain and ate them, rubbing them in their hands. And some of the Pharisees said to them, "Why are you doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath?" Jesus answering them said, "Have you not even read this, what David did when he was hungry? He and those who were with him, how he went into the house of God, took and ate the showbread, and also gave some to those with him, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat."
All right. So, in context, the Pharisees' objection about Jesus' disciples was technically not wrong. It was technically not wrong for them to go, "Hey, you're not supposed to be doing that," because according to the rules on the Sabbath, you weren't allowed to do threshing, which technically rubbing the grain was a form of threshing. So technically
Was work.
Yeah, technically it was work. Technically they weren't wrong in doing that. However, Jesus, he responds by taking them back to 1 Samuel 21, where David's on the run. This is shortly after everything goes down with Saul, and he's trying to figure things out. But this is where ceremonial rule was overlooked to meet the people's needs. And this raises some intriguing questions about the balance between ceremonial law and human necessity. And so my question for you, Pastor, is Jesus suggesting that we ignore God's standards? Because again, God gave him these rules to do here, or is he saying something else?
Well, I think the first question, no, he's not telling them to ignore God's standard.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, he is saying something else, which we will see in the next verse.
Right.
But there are a couple of keys to the first part of this, and one of those is that he went through the grain fields. Now, this is important because some will try to overlay this in Luke chapter 6 with something that we see in Matthew chapter 5 and say, same thing. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but this is the same place, same thing. And we know that there are keys in here that it was not the same event.
Right.
Some of the same teaching is there, but not the same event.
Right.
And right off the bat, we see a portion of that as he was walking through the grain fields. He's not stationary in one place. He's not in a high place.
Right.
But he is walking with them.
Right.
And when it says that some of the Pharisees say, "Why are you doing what is not lawful?" His response immediately stops them in their tracks, because he's not just talking about anybody.
Right.
He references David.
Right.
Immediately, this is a stopping point for Pharisees and Sadducees all throughout the life of Jesus. And we even see it in the life of the early apostles. We even see it with Peter on the day of Pentecost when he says, David, who is buried here, he references, like they're always referencing either an Abraham, a Moses, a David, like the hierarchy of the faith,
right?
Which the Pharisees would have put at almost an idolatrous level in some senses.
Absolutely.
And so Jesus, he gives them one of the worst examples for them, because in order to speak against this, they would have had to speak against David, which in turn would have brought rebuke back to them from their own leadership.
Yeah.
So if they would have been public here to say, well, no, we rebuke David too, that would have been inherently what we would probably say would be heresy.
Yeah.
And so they're really put in a place where they
they can't win.
They just can't.
Right.
They really can't. And that's one of the things that Jesus continually puts the religious in a place where he uses their own law against them. He uses their own past against them. He uses their own focal points against them.
Right.
He uses the people that they have elevated beyond the status of where they should be. He uses those examples against them. He's almost like rebuking the truth with the truth.
Right.
and he's bringing it to a level, like you said, of human necessity.
Right.
And again, the example he gives them, there really isn't, and I almost feel bad for them here, because if you know the context of it, you know that they really can't.
Right.
Because if they are aggressive coming back to Jesus about David, then again, their own leadership is brought down to a place.
Yeah.
They could be what we would call called on the carpet.
Right.
For rebuking a David openly.
Right.
They're really in a no-win situation.
Yeah.
Which I think speaks to the wisdom of Jesus. And again, unlike us,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is not saying this as a gotcha,
Yeah.
and demeaning them where we might do it as spiteful and haha, I got you.
Yeah.
He's not. He's just simply pointing out
Right.
in historically that even someone like David
Mm-hmm.
crossed that threshold because of human need or necessity.
Well, you and I talked in the past about the way that rabbis taught was by asking questions, because if you think through the questions, you can come to the answer. They want you to give you the answer. They don't want to just give you the answer. They want to teach you how to think through it. And so this was not just him just going, hey, but this is almost him going, come on, find the answer. Come out of the darkness that you're in here and walk with me in this situation.
Yeah, almost as if, don't you remember this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because you know and speak highly of him,
Mm-hmm.
like, don't you even remember this?
Right.
And again, it really does put them in a place where they can't really, again, if they come back aggressively, then there's going to be a shadow cast over their own
Mm-hmm.
leadership. If they say nothing at all, then they're left with, well, we just called him on the carpet and
Right.
now we can't say anything. Like, we can't follow up.
Right.
So now we're going to be looked at as being weak,
Right.
where here we would be looked at as being disrespectful to our history and our
Mm-hmm.
heritage and our tradition. And one of the patriarchs of the faith. Now, what are we going to do?
Right.
And again, I think Jesus was so wise in all of that. And again, he's not doing it in the spirit in which we would have done it.
Right.
I mean, come on, let's be honest. Ours would have had probably a little bit of an edge.
Yeah, yeah.
And even when we read it, we probably even read it
Yeah.
with an edge because we're like, yeah, he
Yeah.
got him. He's not really trying to get him. He's trying to lead him to the Father
Yeah.
with everything that he does. Even in his rebuke of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, I think we forget that he's continually trying to lead them to the Father.
Mm-hmm.
Always trying
There's
to
always a
lead them to
level
the
of
Father.
grace for calling people to redemption in everything he does. Every moment he says things. And we even see that within the conversation about when our in Matthew, we talk about when your brother sins against you, go to him one-on-one. It's not a matter of like, I'm going to get you. It's like, it's a process of restoring people with grace.
That's right.
So good stuff. All right. Well, let's continue on because, like you said, we get some more answers about the situation in verse 5.
And he said to them, the Son of Man is also the Lord of the Sabbath.
All right. So now we kind of talked about this earlier. There's either it's the exact same situation or a very similar situation takes place in the book of Mark to this, where Jesus is being questioned about the Sabbath and where they're walking through and picking stuff off the ground, they're rubbing it, and they're being accused of some stuff. But in Mark's account of it, there's a vocabulary of the Sabbath was not made for man. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, before Jesus declares that he is the Lord of the Sabbath. So in light of that phraseology, that theology that Jesus already has about the Sabbath is made for man, man is not made for the Sabbath, what does Jesus mean when he says that he is the Lord of the Sabbath?
Well, continuing on beyond this, when we see the rest of the teachings of Jesus and where it leads them to, even after he's gone, is the fact that the Sabbath isn't a day, the Sabbath is a person. Again, we see this type and shadow of Jesus in the Old Testament, all throughout the Old Testament. We see the type and shadows of Jesus. So the manna that comes from heaven, the seed that comes from heaven in the Old Testament for them in the wilderness is a type and a shadow of Jesus. He is the bread. He is the manna from heaven. And similarly, when we talk about this, he is now pointing to himself as, when you come to me, you will find rest. We know that he has said that over and over. Come to me, all you who are heavy and weary laden, and I'll give you rest. He's not just saying that I'm going to give you rest. I am rest. I am peace. I am hope.
Right.
He tells them that I am the way. I am the truth, not a truth, the truth.
Right.
I am the life. Like, all of these things are pointing everyone to him. And I think it's interesting in Luke anyway, that he says the Son of Man is also the Lord of the Sabbath, which Son of Man takes him all the way back generationally to David.
Right.
And that's how he fulfills being the Messiah, is he had to be the Son of Man as well.
Right. I can't remember the exact terminology that Justice used last week when we talked about the term, but he said it is a messianic statement of saying, I am the Messiah. Without saying it, he's saying it. I am the Messiah. I am God.
Yep.
He called it a divine claim. It's a divine claim by saying
While
that.
he's saying, I'm a man.
Yeah.
But he's saying, I'm the Son of Man.
Right.
Will be the Lord of the Sabbath. The Son of Man is also the Lord of the Sabbath. He is over the Sabbath. But we also know that once he is gone, and now the Holy Spirit comes to live in us, now he is our Sabbath.
Right.
It does not mean that we don't need to have a day or a moment. It's funny that we're recording this today because earlier this morning I was meeting with some people from a nonprofit in the city, and one of the people in the room is a Christian and a counselor, and they were talking about this concept of mini Sabbaths, like that you take mini Sabbaths throughout the day, where you don't just go from one thing to the next, but you literally just take a pause.
Right.
And so if you're driving from one place to the other, don't put music on, don't put talk radio on, don't put anything on. Let it be a moment where you Sabbath with the Lord before you move on to the next thing. Even if you're moving from one meeting to the next in the same building, take a moment just to take a breath and go, Lord, I just give you this moment. I give you myself.
Right.
Where you're literally allowing the peace and the rest of the Lord to come upon you and not just staying in the grind.
Right.
But you're taking these mini Sabbaths almost throughout the day, even 1 to 5 minutes or 5 minutes to 10 minutes, not to say that you don't need a day off or you don't need, and if you're in Israel and you want to do something on a Friday night, you're going to be in trouble because they are very, very focused on that. Now, when you talk about the celebration of Shabbat, even for Jewish people, it may not be as stringent as you can't turn on the light or you can't do this or you can't do that. But in essence of not in the grind, they take that very, very seriously.
Right.
And to the point where I think we could learn a lot. Shabbat for them is a Friday night. As soon as the sun's going down on Friday night, and then all the way into Saturday. And when you're in Israel, Sunday's the first day of the week.
Yeah.
So that's not like it is kind of here. It's not so much like that here anymore.
Right.
But it used to be years ago that Sunday that stores weren't open. You couldn't just go somewhere in the afternoon and go get something to eat. You know, people were eating at the table, around the table. They were eating at the house. You couldn't just go and get gasoline and all these things.
Right.
So even in America, I think we've seen this shifting away from any kind of Sabbath rest that we always have to be going, if not physically, mentally.
Right. Well, you bring up an interesting point about, because again, we're kind of talking about the whole ceremonial law versus just necessity, taking care of people and doing some stuff. But there are some people that when they look at Sabbath, the idea of, mini Sabbaths, that's a nice idea. But they're like, no, the Sabbath it's Saturday. You have got to be, that's when they're diehard churches on Saturdays, no matter what. And, Sunday's a pagan thing. Some people have gone that far. And then there are some people who are like, I know a person personally who he's, how do I put this? He's taken his faith to a point where he's gotten very deep into the conversation about Judaism, everything like that. He's still a Christian. He's everything, but he's structuring his life, and he's starting to structure even his church because he has a home church, things we call it, Friday to Saturday. That's how he's doing his life stuff. Are we confined to a day specifically, to a Saturday, Friday, Saturday, or a Sunday morning, or can our Sabbath be Monday afternoon or be a Monday?
I don't think we're confined to quote unquote a day because again, the Lord is our Sabbath. Now, the problem with that is saying the Lord is your Sabbath and he's not. There's we use that terminology a lot when we're like, oh yeah, well, I'm a believer or I'm this or I'm that, or, oh yeah, I'm reading the scriptures when maybe we're reading a verse every once in a while.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm praying. And we'll use that whole thing. Well, I can pray throughout the day, and we say things like that, but
are we?
Are we really? Right?
Yeah.
It's almost like asking or telling somebody, "I'll pray for you." Well, normally, what happens when you walk away from that if you don't pray? You normally forget to pray for that person, rather than doing it right then. And I think this is the same thing, is that people will use the excuse of, well, I don't have time for it to be a day. The Lord he is a Lord of the Sabbath. He
Right.
is my Sabbath rest. Well, my question would be, are you really resting in him?
Mm.
Because if you're not, then, for some people, I think that a stringent schedule is what they need to honor the Lord.
Yeah.
Just like the disciplines of the faith. We don't need to just be willy-nilly with it and just be like, oh, because what normally ends up happening is we're not really in the discipline of the faith.
Right.
We might be doing it every once in a while, but for some of us, and I would say most of us, we need to be like, no, this is my time for this. This is my time for this. We're not just scheduling God with everything. God is a part of everything we're doing, but we are creating space for that very focused moment with the Lord, whether it's his word, praying, whatever it may be, fasting, very focused.
And that's not to say that doing that, making a scheduled time is you're just doing a religious act like the Pharisees are. Some boils down to the intentions of the heart. I had a professor once talk about how we're talking about spiritual disciplines, and he says, if I call my wife and I tell her I love you, and I say I love you, all the time, do I mean it, or is it just dead liturgy? He says in the spiritual practices, if our heart is in it, we're doing this because we're honoring the Lord.
That's right.
We love the Lord. God honors that. But if it is just a matter of like, all right, well, it's Sunday morning, let me stamp my spiritual time card, that's dead liturgy.
Yeah, and he doesn't even receive that.
Yeah.
But if it's from a pure heart, he receives that. And that's where now anything that we do, if we do it as unto the Lord, can be worship unto the Lord. It's our sacrifice to the Lord.
Yeah.
If I go to work every day and I'm saying this is as unto the Lord, I'm going to do it as unto the Lord, which means that I'm going to do it as a believer in Jesus Christ, being Christ-like in what I do. And so now my work is not going to honor my ethic. My work is going to honor God.
Right.
Because of my behavior, because of the fruit that comes out of my life.
Yeah.
That I'm not an angry plumber ready to smash everybody over the head.
Right.
And I'm not just trying to make money, but I'm doing it as unto the Lord. And now it becomes an act of worship because of my heart.
Absolutely. Cool beans. Not where I planned this conversation to go today, but this is good stuff. I like this.
All right, verse 6 through 9.
Yes, sir.
Now it happened on another Sabbath also. Jesus and these Sabbaths, he just keeps getting in trouble. That he entered the synagogue and taught, and a man there whose right hand was withered. So the scribes and Pharisees watched him closely, whether he would heal on the Sabbath, that they might find an accusation against him. Now, here's the key right here, that the Pharisees now, because they are so intent on finding something wrong with Jesus, now they themselves are not honoring the Sabbath. Because on the Sabbath, they are scheming to bring accusation, which is a heart issue, which means they're not at rest.
Right.
That's a key. You can just read 7 and just go past it, but literally they're scheming, and their desire to catch Jesus in the act is actually them
dishonoring the Sabbath.
That's right, dishonoring Sabbath, that they might find accusation against him. But he knew their thoughts and said to the man who had the withered hand, arise and stand here. And he arose and stood. And then Jesus said to him, I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or destroy it?
Right.
Wow. You want to talk about being called out publicly.
Yeah. I mean, this is the first time Jesus has been in a room where there's we talked about with Justice a couple weeks ago about the man was lowered from the ceiling for healing. And Jesus is like, your sins are forgiven. They're all freaking out about that. They're like, you can't do that. That's blasphemous. And Jesus is like, all right, cool. Which is worse, saying that he's healed or saying that his sins are forgiven? And of course, they're thinking, well, you can't heal anybody. You just blaspheme God. And boop, man stands up. And so these Pharisees have already seen Jesus do stuff like this.
Yep.
You would think that by this point they would know not to try to trap him. But he asks them, again, a very poignant question that's directed at them. Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to destroy it? He presents them with this very intriguing question. How does this question challenge the thinking of these leaders who, again, like we said, they're already there with harmful thoughts in their mind? How does this challenge them?
Well, number one, it's public. That's big,
Mm-hmm.
because the challenge now to them isn't just about them and Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
It now is about their leadership with the people that are there,
Mm-hmm.
because it's clear. Where is he? He's in the synagogue. He's teaching. It's a very public place. It's a very intimate place
Mm-hmm.
while being public. And it is a place of spiritual leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus has already taught and established his leadership as a rabbi, by the way.
Yeah.
We tend to forget that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like he is not qualified to speak in the synagogue. They are never saying that
Mm-hmm.
because he's a rabbi.
Right.
And so, but when he calls them out and says, is it lawful to do good or do evil, to save a life or destroy a life? Now publicly in the synagogue, they have to say it's better for this man to not be healed
Oh my goodness.
in the synagogue.
Right.
And that would have been like, again, these guys are like their position, their leadership, their spiritual standing
Mm-hmm.
within the faith community is all being called into question.
Yeah.
And it's not like they're in some back room where they just say it to Jesus themselves. They're going to be called into account
Mm-hmm.
for what they say because it is public.
Right.
So I think the most challenging thing of this situation is that it's public and it's in the synagogue,
Right.
because they are going to have to, if they say what they want to say, it is going to cast a shadow over their motives
Yeah.
and their own thinking and what they're about. They're not about the guy's healing at all. They're not about his welfare
Mm-hmm.
at all.
Right.
Yet they're spiritual leaders in the synagogue.
Mm.
That casts a pretty big shadow.
Yeah. Definitely.
And I think that's where even we as leaders have to continually be about our motives. Like, how are our motives?
Mm-hmm.
What are our motives? Is it just to do another service? Is it just to do this?
Mm-hmm.
Just to get through something, just to get by? Why are we preaching?
Mm-hmm.
What are we preaching? And why are we preaching what we're preaching?
Yeah.
Why? Why are we doing that? Are we doing it to be known? Are we doing it for people to say, how good we are? Are we doing it just to do it? Like, why are we doing it? And I think that's always, as a spiritual leader, checking the motives of our heart. And I tend to believe that a lot of times that's what Jesus was doing. He was giving them time
Yeah.
to check their heart.
Yeah.
Because they can give the answer if they want to. They can say, no, it's best to heal him. We're good.
Mm-hmm.
David ate the showbread because there was a need. There was a need. God bless. And what nobody really even talks about in the context of this is that the Sabbath wasn't just about a day. It was about rest,
Mm-hmm.
peace, shalom in your body, in your soul, in your spirit.
Mm-hmm.
This man's body had not had peace.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because his hand was withered.
Right.
If your body is not well, what happens to your soul? There's no peace.
Right.
Jesus literally gives this man a Sabbath
Right.
on the Sabbath.
Right.
Like, there's no better opportunity that this man receives Sabbath rest
Mm-hmm.
on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
That's pretty hard to argue with.
Oh yeah. 100%. All right. Cool. All right. Let's continue on.
Verse 10, and when he had looked around at them all, he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he did so. And his hand was restored as whole, that word whole, leaning even into shalom, as the other. But they were filled with rage and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus.
Man. So Jesus continues to heal the man, but it causes leadership to be in an uproar, even though they were presented with the truth. They were presented with the fact that bringing healing is actually true Sabbath. It's true Sabbath rest. And but it was super public. They were embarrassed, and they're in an uproar. And they already came there with the intention of trying to catch Jesus.
That's
and now their intentions have been snared. They've been embarrassed in front of everybody else, and now they're lashing out, for better terms. Question for you is, why do some people get so frustrated when presented with truth that they see in action? And how can we help ourselves to respond better when we're presented with a similar situation where maybe we walk into it, maybe knowingly or not knowingly, we have an intention to do something that maybe we were wrong about, and somebody calls it out, and then we're called on the carpet with mud on our face, if you will. Like, how do you walk that out?
Yeah, I think that their frustration came from pride.
Yeah.
Because it was positional. It wasn't just about religious position, but religiously would also give them political position as well. So to where the Pharisees had political influence because they were looked at from the Roman governors as if we can appease them, then there's no tumult from the people. So if we can, and we even see that going all the way up to the death of Jesus,
right,
and how that all plays out. So for them, I think their frustration came from Jesus was challenging their religious position. He was a threat to them, that they couldn't control people, that they couldn't control with the law. They couldn't control all the scenarios and situations and maintain their religious and political position.
Right.
And I think for us, we can learn from that to keep our ego in check. That, if we ever get to the place, and you've heard me say this a lot, if our mentors and the people that have poured into our lives cannot receive correction themselves, then we need to check to see if maybe they need to continue to be our mentors.
Yeah.
If you're the smartest person in the room, you probably need to find another room.
Yeah.
And that is where they had gotten to. They had gotten to such the place that no one could tell them anything. They were above the common person, common man, where here's this carpenter's son, but one thing they can't argue against is he is a rabbi.
Yeah.
So that messes them up because now he has religious authority.
Right.
According to everything we know about Jesus, how he was raised, and his public ministry beginning at 30, which again is a rabbinical, at 12 in the temple teaching. That tells us, okay, he's not going back to being a carpenter like his dad was in the natural, that he's moving on in schooling and teaching and training in the rabbinic order.
Right. And
even recognized as the disciples before they were quote unquote the disciples, as rabbi, teacher, he's recognized as that. So Jesus is the threat of threats. And now he's claiming to be the Son of Man, the Son of God, which takes it to a whole other level.
Right.
And so
it has demonstrated attributes of those things.
That's right. And seeing the fruit of that. And so I think for us is learning from the Pharisees of keeping our ego in check and our pride and our arrogance and being humble before the Lord and being humble enough to say, I was wrong.
Yeah.
I was wrong. I didn't have any ill intentions in it, but I was wrong. And I think we find the intentionality of people and where their hearts were in their response when they're called out on it if it's wrong. What is their response? Is it a defense?
Right.
Or is it humility that says, you know what? Let's look at that.
Yeah.
To see if I really was wrong.
Definitely.
And if I was, then I own that. Right. And one of my mentors always says it, if you mess up, fess up, get up. Right. Like just mess up, fess up, get up, like make it right.
Yeah.
And own it. And so I think that, again, their frustration, I believe, came because they were really, their position was being questioned.
Yeah. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching today's episode. Hope it's encouraged you. Hope it's challenged you. If we can pray with you, reach out to us, mediahub@thpshreveport.com. But beyond that, guys, we want to hear testimonies. How has this challenged you? What are your thoughts on the Sabbath? After listening to today's conversation about it, how has it maybe changed your idea of the Sabbath? And how are you living it out? We want to hear from you guys. We want to do life with you guys. We want to encourage you. So that being said, until next time, have a great week.